happens in the spring. They will very likely issue a ruling in the summer, in June of 2013. Now, as you're aware, and here's where I want you to weigh in. The number here is 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840. I'm going to play a soundbite from George Will here in just a moment. And this is of a piece with what we've heard from some other evangelical leaders, like Jim Daly of Focus on the Family. We've talked about this before, but he was interviewed, a widely published interview with the Los Angeles Times right after the election. And essentially what Jim Daly was saying, look, there's no point in fighting this fight anymore. We've lost the fight over marriage. It's time to just kind of accept the reality. The younger generation is gone. We're never going to get them back. They've gone over to the gay marriage side, and it's futile to think that we can persuade them to come back to the natural marriage side. We've just got to sort of accept the fact that we've lost this battle, that when it comes to the cultural battle over marriage, it's game over, and we just need to admit it. We need to accept it as a reality, as sad as it may be, and stop fighting that fight. And instead, let's look for ways where we can work together with homosexual activists where we do share some common objectives. Now, we need to know. So Focus on the Family, by its own admission, is virtually checked out of the culture war. They're not going to be engaged any longer as they were under James Dobson, a very striking and decided shift in emphasis and focus for Focus on the Family as they move forward. And, of course, that is their right as an organization. That's the responsibility of the board to set a vision or a direction for an organization and then pick a guy that'll implement that direction. And Jim Daly is the guy that's going to do that. So they've made a very deliberate decision to move away from the cultural engagement that the organization had under James Dobson, and now they're moving away from cultural engagement toward a softer, kinder, gentler approach. And so here's a question I have for you. I'm going to play this George Will clip, and then here's a question I have for you. Is that what you want AFA to do? Do you think AFA ought to do what Focus on the Family's done and just recognize that this battle is over, we can't win, it's gone, there's no point in even fighting anymore, we just got to roll over and accept the fact that we've lost and move forward? Or do you want us to continue to hang in there and keep fighting to protect the institution of marriage and the family? 888-589-8840. Here's the George Will clip. He was on a news program yesterday, and here's what he had to say about the battle over homosexual marriage.
As part of equal protection, Peter Finley Dunn, great American humorist, created a man named Mr. Dooley, who famously said, the Supreme Court follows the election returns. This decision by the Supreme Court came 31 days after an election day in which 3 states, for the first time, endorsed same-sex marriage at the ballot box. Never happened before. Maine, Maryland, and the state of Washington. Now, the question is, how will that influence the court? It could make them say, it's not necessary for us to go here. They don't want to do what they did with abortion. The country was having a constructive accommodation on abortion, liberalizing abortion laws. The court yanked the subject out of democratic discourse and embittered the argument. They may say, we don't want to do that. We can just let the democracy take care of this. On the other hand, they could say it's now safe to look at this because there is something like an emerging consensus. Quite literally, the opposition to gay marriage is dying.
It's dying. It's old people, he says. The opposition to homosexual marriage is dying. Time to just accept it, get over it, and move on. If you agree that that's what AFA ought to do, that we ought to accept that the opposition to gay marriage is dying, we just ought to accept it, surrender, run up the white flag, and focus on other things? Or do you want us to keep fighting? 888-589-8840. I've got a column up today at rightlyconcerned.com, and I'll probably have to finish talking about this when we come out of the bottom of the hour, and then we'll start taking phone calls on this. But what I raise in my column, as the Supreme Court has taken up this issue, DOMA remembers the Defense of Marriage Act. This defined marriage for federal purposes as the union of one man and one woman. Only domestic benefits that can go to a couple are if they are married, and in order to be married, they got to be one man and one woman. And it protected the right of states to decide for themselves what their marriage policy was going to be. Just because somebody in another state recognized gay marriage, that would not compel them to recognize marriage in their own state. So it's a very strong states' rights, state sovereignty, 10th Amendment piece of legislation, as well as defining it in federal law. And it passed with overwhelming majorities. You know, the vote in the Senate was 85-14. The vote in the House was 342-67. And it was signed into law by a Democrat president. Again, the margin in the Senate was 85-14. In the House, 342-67. And it was signed by Bill Clinton, who was a Democrat. You can't get any more bipartisan than that. You can't get any more overwhelming than that. And so what I raise is, look, if they overturn DOMA, if they set DOMA aside, then what this means is it means the end of representative government in the United States. Because DOMA was something that was enacted overwhelmingly by our elected representatives, both Republicans and Democrats, signed into law by a Democrat president. And if the Supreme Court comes in and just sweeps it away, then that is the end of any pretense that we have a Republican representative form of government in the United States. It'll just be a sham for us to think that we can establish public policy through our elected representatives. So if they overturn DOMA, then we may as well just shut down Congress, because what's its point? What's the point of passing something with an 85% majority and have a Democrat sign it into law if the Supreme Court, with just a flick of the finger, can send it to the landfill, send it to the ash heap? We might as well just turn everything over to our black-robed overlords. Now, what if they overturn Prop 8? Prop 8 was the marriage amendment in California. It passed 52-48. 7 million Californians went to the polls exercising their constitutional right to vote and said, said in California, we're going to elevate protection for natural marriage to our state constitution. It's that important to us. We don't want any judges tampering with this, so we are going to define marriage as one man, one woman, and we're going to define it and defend it and elevate it to the protection that things in our state constitution have. It's the highest level of protection you can give to public policy, and they did. 7 million Californians went out and said, we want marriage to be one man, one woman. Now, if the Supreme Court sends Prop 8 to the landfill, then that's the end of democracy. If they send DOMA to the landfill, that's the end of a Republican form of government. In a Republican form of government, remember, we don't directly enact legislation. We elect the people who make legislation for us. That's a representative form of government. We make legislation, but it is not directly, but it is through our elected representatives. That's a Republican form of government. That's what we have by our form of government, is a republic, not a democracy. But we still have preserved a couple of pure vestiges of democracy, and one of them is the right of the people to amend their federal constitution and their state constitution, and only the people can do this directly. In other words, if the people themselves do not go and vote for this thing, the Constitution doesn't get changed. That is pure Athenian Greek democracy, and it was exercised by the people of California in 2008. Now, if the Supreme Court comes along and flicks Prop 8 into the ash heap, then that's the end of democracy. We're no longer a republic. We are no longer even a democracy. And we might as well just turn everything, including state policy, over to this 9-member Politburo, which never ever has to answer to the people over whom they exercise such dictatorial power.